Have you all noticed that AOS has a bit of a terrain problem?
Okay.
When I say that, the first thing a lot of folks go to is the idea of faction-specific terrain, that they like some for some armies but not for others. That's actually only a part of it, because this actually is much bigger than that, and I'm going to talk about it in this video. Those of you who are relatively new to the game, by that I mean the last 6 to 9 months or like that, you may not realize that the landscape of terrain in Age of Sigmar was super different towards the early end of the game's launch back in 2015. At one point, we had a ton of terrain, different options to build all kinds of cool stuff. There were entire chaos fortresses, and there was a new line of terrain specifically to match kind of the more heavy fantasy side of Age of Sigmar. For instance, do you remember these two books? Minion of Chaos was a battle tome that introduced us to very AOS-ified terrain. This is the Numinous Oculum, the Dragon Fate Dais, the Realm Gates, the Ophidian Archway, that kind of stuff. In the back, there were also 2 Realm of Battle boards and a few battalions, if you can imagine that. Battalions for terrain pieces aren't available in Match Play anymore, but they kind of combined these different terrain elements into a cohesive table. In addition to that, there was the Chaos Dreadhold Battle Tome. This was another book released around that similar time frame within a year or so. It included 4 pieces of terrain that can be put together to make a mighty bastion of chaos. With these sets, things were pretty much booming in terms of consistent high fantasy stuff being released for the game to make up for the loss of some of the more traditional fantasy tropes that we saw. You may not like them all, and we'll kind of get to some of the downsides to those just terrain pieces here in a second, but it was a trajectory, right? We were getting new armies and new lore and new terrain to kind of bring all those things together. It was a good time. Nothing in scope to say like the 40k Mechanicum set, where it's all very modular and you can kind of build and customize your table, but it was a process of going from zero on the launch of AOS to something. But at this point, as the game kind of evolved into its newer iteration, a few things started to change. For example, some of those brand new pieces of terrain that I mentioned started to disappear. Of those 10 pieces of terrain that I mentioned between those 2 battle tomes, only 5 are available now. That is the Numinous Oculum, the Realm Gates, the Ophidian Archway, and the 2 Realm of Battle boards. Meaning the entire fortress set is now gone, as well as the Dragon Fate Dais. Now, to their credit, some of the older kits were reboxed, meaning they took the Garden of Moor, which was the graveyard set from Warhammer Fantasy Battles, jammed 2 of them into one box and call it now the Sigmarite Mausoleum, which is still a fantastic buy. Other things like what is now called the War Scryer Citadel actually went away for a time. You couldn't get them, and then they reboxed them much later on. Just as a side note here, you might find interesting, it's now on last chance to buy, so that's going to matter here in a second. My point is, though, that a lot of the new AOS themed stuff was kind of evaporating over time. New players would have very little access to meaningful terrain that was set in this setting. Now, of course, at the time, there were some things that were still generic. The Mausoleum I mentioned, of course, before, the Graveyard set, as well as some woods and hills and things like that. But then the second thing happened, right? The second hammer to drop was the Sylvaneth Battle Tome. This was the first book to establish that an army can own a piece of terrain. Now, I understand very clearly that you can just take it as a citadel would and just use the rules for that, but functionally it is their terrain. Remember, the other battle tomes that we saw, the Chaos Dreadhold and Dominion of Chaos, they were all about fighting over generic pieces, meaning no one had control of them. They were plot devices to get armies to fight for control over them, but this is someone who their army brings this terrain with them. Now they're taking generic pieces from the pool that we have available to all of us and assigning it to an army. That's a very interesting change. Now I want to be clear here that I do like the mechanic of the Sylvaneth having the Wild Woods. I think it's a really cool thematic thing, bringing more on as the forest grows, aggressively. I like it. This is not about Sylvaneth. This is about taking terrain that was available to all of us and then kind of divvying it out to certain factions. And it was at this point that I think, in the aftermath of the sales figures from the Sylvaneth Battle Tome, that GW saw value in this idea. And we're going to fast forward a little bit to our current situation. So we had this moment where terrain really did seem to explode. We had a lot of options in the Chaos Fort. You could make like towers out in the wilderness, that kind of stuff, not just a huge wall. You also had a whole bunch of more generic terrain, and then it all kind of either siphoned off to certain armies or just got dropped from their product catalog entirely. The reason we're fast forwarding is because design and production of models, namely in this case, of course, terrain pieces, takes a lot of time. And so we're fast forwarding about 3 years to our current setting. Now, one thing I do want to put here, because I know someone's going to say in the comments, is that the things that I just mentioned didn't happen in a linear fashion. They didn't come out with those things, those terrain pieces, drop them, and then the Sylvaneth book came out. They all kind of happened over time, but it's part of their overall Battletome design process and the way that they're managing their product catalog. Regardless of the order, all of those events brought us to the present. As of the time of writing this article here, the army update process seems to be take an existing army, update them, they get endless spells, a terrain piece, and they're good to go. Some factions have a bunch more kits being added and or redone, like Looms by Gits had a bunch of kits redone, as well as, say, the Flesh Eater Courts had the Arch region added. So there are variations in how they deal with certain armies, but generally speaking, they do seem to be getting a terrain piece now, as well as possibly endless spells, and even before then, some factions were getting terrain. For example, the Idoneth Deepkin do not have endless spells, but they do have terrain. Same goes for the Maggotkin of Nurgle, which have the Nurgle trees that pop up everywhere, and also, of course, the Sylvaneth, don't forget them. And so what does this mean? Well, there's a lot going on with terrain again, but it's all on a very faction-specific level, and that's very interesting. There's very few things coming out for everyone to use, a lot coming out for your army. So to chat about this more, we're actually going to look at the GW sales page at the time of recording, which is 3/23/2019, and check out what they have. So keep in mind, this is on the US storefront at this time of recording, and what we can see here, when you go to search all scenery, there are 23 entries, 4 of which are bundles of already existing products. I'm going to exclude those, right, because there are already things that are already listed. There's bundled in different sets. 2 things that shouldn't be there. There's the not endless spells from Khorne, as well as the Balewind Vortex, which shouldn't be there. It's an endless spell. And 1 thing on Last Chance to Buy, which is, of course, the War's Cry Citadel. There are 6 faction-specific terrain pieces. They forgot the Loon Shrine and Khorne Altar, but there should be 2 more, of course. The Dominion of Chaos Battletome, and remember, you can't buy a lot of the stuff from that. And so all in all, that comes out to be 9 things that you can buy and use in a way to build your table. That is to say, 9 items that are generic and will work across any battle, no matter what kind of army you are playing. And let's dig just a little bit deeper than that, because my real point of my argument is coming up here in just a bit. Of those 9 terrain pieces, I'm going to list them off here: Realmgate's Mausoleum, the Numinous Oculum, the Howlheart set, which I put on there just because I kind of like the set as a little tablescape, and some Azerite Ruins, the Ophidian Archway, Azerite Ruins by themselves, Walls and Fences, as exciting as that is, the Madrath Throne, and the Azerite Townscape, right? 4 of those are meant to be very special. That is to say, if you're a narrative gamer like myself, you create an exciting battlefield as part of your enjoyment for the hobby. The Realmgate, the Numinous Oculum, the Madrath Throne are meant to be rare things that you fight over, not one of 6 pieces of terrain on the table. Like, there's not supposed to be 6 Numinous Oculums on a table, for example. If you look at the book that supports them, the Dominion of Chaos, they are supposed to be like the focal point of your narrative plot device, right? We fight over this thing because it is a super powerful magic artifact building that we need to an important strategic location, that kind of stuff. So if you have a bunch of them on the table, they cease to be interesting. When everything is special, nothing is. We have so little generic terrain, right? Just stuff to fill to make the table more interesting, that it's actually hard to fill a 6x4 by doing so. So these little pieces that are meant to be important, things that armies clash over in these huge stories, they become mundane, because to fill the table you have to have multiples of them, right? And an Ophidian Archway over here, a Numinous Oculum, a Realmgate on each corner, that kind of stuff. They should be rare. They're supposed to be interesting for that reason. Again, if everything's special, nothing is. So stepping back, what does that have to do with the overall question? Well, when people ask me, do I like the fact that other armies have faction-specific terrain? Do you like the fact that when you join an army, you have to buy a terrain piece that you get for free, but doesn't always do a whole lot? Those kinds of questions. The truth of the matter is, I don't have a problem with it. I don't care that the herbs don't exist. I don't care about the shipwreck. I don't like some of them as much as I like others, to be honest with you. But what I don't like is when a board can't tell a compelling story. There was a saying that I picked up from a podcast, Independent Character, which is a 40K podcast, that terrain, the table itself, is the third player in any game, meaning it has such a dramatic impact on the game from both telling the story as well as just actually having rules for each individual terrain piece to help you or hinder you, that it is functionally a third player of the game. Well, if you're playing a narrative game and that third player isn't part of the narrative, right? They're not contributing to the story because it looks bland. It looks too open. There's no line of sight blocking terrain available from GW. There's only these things that are supposed to be super rare and important, but there are so many of them that none of them are. It feels like that third player in our game doesn't want to tell a compelling story and doesn't want to contribute in a fun way. And that's an issue. So what do we do at this point going forward? Like, what is kind of the crux of this, right? I think the most important thing, honestly, is don't groan when your buddy gets terrain for his army. I don't think it helps anyone. First of all, they look incredible. The terrain-specific models, think about like the Deepkin boat, the Herd Stone looked incredible. I loved building that one. The gnaw holes were the bane of my existence to build, but they're super fun to paint. I really, really enjoyed that. Like, they're really cool models. And they, I think, add more stuff to the game. Like, I'm happy terrain in any capacity is being added to the game because we need it, but I don't think it should stop there. Point is, don't groan about it, because making people feel bad for something they like or something they're excited about doesn't help anybody. But as far as what the game needs, I'm going to go out there and say modular ruins. When I say modular ruins, what I'm talking about is, if you look at 40K, it has the ability to give you these pieces of buildings and scrap and stuff like that, and you can build whatever thing you want to create. It could be a smaller town where everything's one story, you're just kind of going through huge alleyways. It could be a tight-knit corridor deep in like a hive city, and you can create anything in between because of the modularity of their terrain. Right, with the ability to build whatever you want, you can do the deepest, most cramped downtown of an ancient metropolis, the outskirts of any city, the Grave District. Again, once you have a base kit, like a modular set, you can start adding those other things in to make it fun. It could be the city's on the left, and it's outside of a grave thing in Shyish, and so you get a bunch of those Sigmar mausoleums, and you have a whole bunch of grave stuff on the other side, and so one side has a lot of line stop blocking, one doesn't. There's a lot of scatter terrain. Those kinds of things are really visually very interesting. All of a sudden, those terrain pieces that are supposed to be, again, by their own lore in the Dominion of Chaos book, super rare, super special, and so important that entire armies will die to get them. Because you have enough stuff filling the board, you can have one of those be in the center or off to the side, and we can all fight for it. I don't want like the AOS terrain train to stop there with just modular ruins and things like that. But if you think about the things that we see in some of the best Black Library novels, we can build them with what we have combined with something like that. For example, let's off some stuff here. We can build the city on the back of a giant, basically slug in Gur, and that was in the Realm of Book it was in the book Spear of Shadows, and that was an awesome city to learn about. You could do a whole bunch of stuff there. You could also do the Realm Gate that's surrounded by ruins in the Black Pyramid by Josh Reynolds. It was Josh Reynolds. And that was an incredibly cool scene as well, and they're fighting over that through the corridors, all with the light of a Realm Gate shining upon them. You could do any number of the battles from a Realm Gate War series, right? That big campaign series that I went through, and it's like 12 books or something like that. They incorporate those super special pieces of terrain as focal points for battles. So like giving them relevance and meaning again, and importance really, would do well. Realistically, just modular stuff would form a great basis to build off of. All those things would be a great base to build off of, at least when it comes to like world building with your table. One thing that I do want to point out, because I like being positive and hopeful with these videos as much as I can, absolutely. I know Warcry is on the horizon. If you haven't seen the pictures for it, I'm going to show some here, and I want you to really look at the terrain instead of the models involved. What it looks like is it is a modular set of these cool like gateways and wall ruins and stuff like that. That should give us a chance to make really tight corridors, line of sight block and stuff, and the flat tops on them make me think it is modular. So if you wanted to magnetize those suckers, you could probably build a really cool set that stands really tall. Of course, that'll only mean anything if GW itself really invests in building a whole series of things that work together, like they did with the 40k AdMech stuff, where all those things kind of link together. Everything from the pipes on the ground that lead to the, I don't know what they're called, the stupid pipes that are all shattered and stuff like that. Every bit of machinery kind of links together. If they did the same thing for AOS, it would be fantastic. And I really think mostly that would solve our problems when it comes to faction-specific terrain. I kind of liken it to a situation where when Beasts of Chaos, the Battle Tome, dropped, people were complaining about Zangors being in there because they were kind of a dominant focus. And I asked somebody, do you really not like that Zangors are in this book, or do you not like that Pestigors and Korngors and the Slaanesh Gors, that they're not in it? And I thought about it for a while, and I was like, no, that's a good point. I'm more upset that they're not in there and this one thing is. What that tells me is, we see faction-specific terrain sticking out like a sore thumb right now. If we raised the amount of other stuff that could be engaging and interesting and make our tables fun and diverse, I really honestly believe that people wouldn't have such negative opinions about it. It's not universally true. Some of them still don't make sense, like why are you moving this entire 12-ton Hearthstone into battle here, just outside of this person's gate fortress? I get that some of it still doesn't make sense, but at a certain point, what you're saying is, I built this cool table with a story, and this piece of terrain is going to be my army's splash of character in that. Whereas right now, it makes up probably a dominant portion of the terrain that's meaningful on the table. So having cool stuff that is modular, you can build whatever you want, would certainly help. But of course, that is just my opinion, and I want to hear yours. Go ahead and leave in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Don't get in so much to like what terrain pieces you think are dumb or not, but tell me what you want to see from GW to kind of alleviate the issue. It seems to be that they are just going to make faction-specific terrain, so let's just assume that's just the case for everything. And when your army comes around for next Battle Tome, you're going to get a piece of terrain. But can we alleviate that seeming like a big issue if we raise the amount of other cool, interesting things out there to make boards that tell a story or just fun to play on? What kind of stuff would you like to see? I said modular ruins, but I want to hear some other ideas out there to really flesh this stuff out. Thank you all so much for watching, and happy wargaming.